Hey guys, hope you're doing okay. It is New Year's Eve 2020. I hope you're doing all right with all the corona stuff and getting a bit of a break and some peace at home with some loved ones. I had what I would call a Christmas light. It was all good, but what normally feels like it spreads over 3 days just took like one day and then I was back to it. But I am in this liminal space between Christmas and New Year and enjoying creating and thinking about what's next for the year. So, having said that, I had a call with a friend of mine, Tom Hassan. I actually don't know how to say his surname. I've only ever seen it written down. Fleshing out an idea I've been working on since the Oxford Union. Hopefully by the time this goes out, there'll be a link below for my Oxford Union debate. I'm not going to go into any more detail because it's all in there. He's a very smart young bloke in Belgium. He runs an AI company. He has a podcast called Impact Billionaires, which I did with him a few weeks ago. And the AI company is called Humane.ai, trying to keep human-centered AI development. And basically a really awesome example of a human who brings me up into a higher kind of stratosphere, which is why I wanted to do this first exploration with him. And so here it is. I'll leave you with it. It's 35 minutes long or so. So get a cup of tea, hunker down. I've intensely chopped into it to try and give you just the core content and none of the ums and ahs. So if it's to read a little bit, it's just to try and keep the thing moving, and I hope you like it. Hopefully see you guys very soon. I'd really love to hear your comments, and hopefully we can unfold this dialogue together. You'll see what I mean when you watch the clip. Catch you later. How you doing, mate, anyway?
Yeah, I'm doing good, man.
Can I just give you like a 10, 15-minute blast and then we go from there? Because I want to catch you up basically on the last few weeks or whatever.
All right, I'm gonna grab something to take notes.
So firstly, doing the Impact Billionaires podcast was awesome. I really enjoyed, and I think we both had a really high frequency kind of vibe rolling off that. And
Sure.
so not just doing it, but also then you taking the effort to curate a couple of clips that you felt were most valuable helped surface back to me a couple of the moments where I was most alive, if you know what I mean. And I know there's a difference when I do conversations between things that are already in the bag and things that come out as an emergent consequence of being with someone. And when we got onto that, love is viral stuff, some of that was in the bag. But then the bit I said at the very end about, that's what makes it so fucking exciting, this sort of beautiful irrationality, right? It seemed to resonate. You got excited, I felt excited. It all came from a good place, and that's probably a good test. So then I had my Oxford Union debate where we were debating on the morality of the city, which I think you saw. So I put it in at the end of my speech. But what I didn't expect was that I was rumbling through the speech. You're trying to not fuck it up. You're on Zoom. You're like thinking it's the most important debate of my life. And I'm just sitting at home like I am now with a coffee and a kitchen table wearing my tuxedo. But then right at the end, I said, will we sell out, or will we give everything we've got for this beautifully irrational human experience? And I choked up. For me, choking up is that kind of subconscious, honest feedback that tells me that I wasn't just gaming the situation for, market fit or whatever. It got me, and then I could trust it even more. So then I started thinking more about this sense of beautiful irrationality. And is this true? I've said I felt something, but is it true? Do people agree? So you start Googling it, you start looking at that term. Then a model came to me, really simple, dead simple, but kind of reminds me of like Maslow's hierarchy of needs a little bit, but different. I'll call it like the irrationality sandwich, where I think there's 3 layers of kind of human experience, broad buckets, obviously. And I think we all scale through all of them. I think you've got at the bottom, you've got painful irrationality. You've got that lack of awareness, and all you have as an option is the ability to react to the environment around you. I call that the kind of the lower self. So it is part of us. It's an important part of us, but it needs help, you know what I mean, to fulfill our potential. Then I think the next rung up is rationality. You're teaching people discipline, structure, conceptualization. You're helping them to create order from chaos. You're helping them to think systematically, to get some view on their natural, emotional, and sort of I forget with Daniel Kahneman if it's system 1, I think, is the intuitive system. System 2 would be this rationality style stuff. And you're helping them to make longer term decisions, basically disconnect them from the world that we're in, really, this sort of sensory experience, so that we can make more objective choices. Obviously, the whole Enlightenment has all come through that way of thinking. This is why this topic's challenging, because people feel very passionately about it. And we'll come back to that. But at the top, for me, there's this whole part of what I think it means to be human that I think we've been scratching at, which is beautiful irrationality. And actually, if you think about at the top state of what it means to be human, what are we like in our best moments? Actually, I think we break through, we transcend rationality, and we break into exponentially creative, explosive moments that really are reserved for humanity at its best. And for me, if our conception of humanity is rational at best, and I can think of some very well-meaning groups that think like this, the modern atheists think like this, the effective altruists, brilliant group who think very well about how to make your money do the best work or make the most amount of difference. Actually, I think we are missing that in our best moments, at our potential, in our flow state, humans manage to combine their lower selves and their rationality. And that provides scaffolding for what you may only experience once or twice in life, or you might experience a lot, these kinds of explosive moments of creativity that seem to just completely defy the rational model. Now, in actuality, they may be rational in the sense that you're correctly optimizing towards the life that you want, but the boundaries of that might be different, and the process by which you're doing it is very different. So you're not consciously thinking through these things. And secondly, your sense of identity may not be individualistic or may not be intelligible or understandable by you, firstly, or by anybody else in the group. And that's what, for me, makes it transcendent. So it's not like a truth claim about what is and what isn't. And then if you go to the archetypes, like, take your Jesus Christ archetype, which is what I grew up with. I got a tattoo the other day, actually.
That's cool. It's an owl and an owl.
Exactly. The owl is about the observing self, obviously, that I met in the woods. The lion is about this brave actor in the world, who wants to go out and do good. And that was what I grew up with Aslan and Lion King, and with Jesus Christ as the lion kind of out there in the world doing good. But then I learned to step back a bit and observe and listen and things like that. And so for me, the wisdom is about having both and about knowing when to pull from each of those inspirations, if you will, hence why it's difficult. It's literally visually difficult to put those two together, because it's just not as simple or as easy.
Yeah, no, it's actually a really good way to put it together. I think it's really nice. It comes down to being versus doing as well, I feel as well. But I'm going to let you.
Exactly that. For me, it's the archetype of those two parts, and we need them both to live a meaningful and fulfilling life. Yeah, so grew up with this archetype of Jesus Christ, the ultimate doer, if you like. And I think that it comes from his ultimate sense of belonging and understanding of connection to the Father, the unknown, or whatever, in that story, the Father. His life, and ultimately at the end of his life, his death, and then his resurrection, for me, represents this human living a beautifully irrational life. No one could comprehend it. No one could make sense of it. Yet the light that was emitting from the story of Jesus just was blinding everyone. It was awesome, and you just know it's awesome in your gut and in your other centers of intelligence, your gut and your heart, sometimes before you know it in your top mind. What I realized was, for me to really take seriously this idea of beautiful irrationality, the more I've looked at it, the more I really believe it. But the more I realized that I have to do a significant amount of work on explaining what we mean by rationality, because actually I'm not throwing rationality under the bus here. I'm thinking it's incredibly valuable, actually a very important way to organize society. Actually, if you look at all of the discourse that you see, it's always about protecting society from bad ideas and from bad behavior, which is all a very important part of the mix. We've had discussions about justice, but what I'm interested in is our reaching up, our higher frequency. Like, yes, we need all this. So we need that scaffolding. It's a good way to organize society, but doesn't mean it's true about who we are in our best moments. And I think it's absolutely vital that we have a conception of humanity that allows us to reach for the stars, basically. And it needs to be exciting, for the same reason that Elon Musk wants to go to Mars. Whether he does or he doesn't, he wins because he's just doing something exciting that gives us a greater sense of who we are in the world. And I've done a number of public conversations. The first one was Solve. We did 10 stops around the world with young people, asking them, what problems do you see in your town? And just listening to them for an hour. Then we take a break and what have you seen that works? And what could you imagine that could work well in your in your town? And taking them on that journey and giving them a little bit of framework, actually, from the social progress imperative, showing them objectively and more rationally how they connect into the wider map as well. But hopefully the product of which being this greater creative imagination and also a bit of a network of 50 or 100 people in Mumbai that they maybe can connect with and talk to about these things. I then did 10 conversations on my woods. So I took a 30-minute film and dimmed the room and gave people this peaceful kind of woodsy experience in 10 locations around the UK, and then just asked them, how do you feel? And had a big whiteboard and wrote down all the words that they said, and then assimilated this kind of meta mood board from these 10 locations around the UK, seeing how they similar, different, etc. And then finally, earlier this year, I did 12 episodes of a New Agreements podcast, where I was asking, what is a new agreement you can imagine in the world that might help us to flourish and fulfill our potential and survive, frankly, over the next sort of generation. And then I made a little video, and I think I'll put summaries of all three of those discourses below. There's a good question to ask, and maybe this will be part of our discussion. I don't know. If someone cares about something, an idea, what's the best way to disseminate that idea? And there's lots of default routes of like write a book and all that kind of shit. But as I look back on my life already, I can see that I love discourse. I love conversation, and I've seen it work. I've seen the transference of ownership of ideas really go deep into people's minds and have a lot of fun doing it. The concern is with rationality, because of the nature of the subject, it's very controversial and runs very, very deep for a lot of people because it's at the heart of enlightenment and scientific paradigm. And I do see that a lot of atheists treat science as a religion as well as a method of inquiry. Plus, also on the Christian side, I come from the Christian background. Half of my friends are still like active faith-believing Christians. And I would say there's probably a range of views in there within the Christian world of people that would probably really believe and agree with what we're talking about now. And also actually others that wouldn't. They've actually bought into a very kind of legalistic structure in their Christianity. What I like about it is I think it can cut a cross-section across both religion and science as well. I think it would be fascinating to have conversations where you've got a religious theologian and you've got sort of an atheistic scientist, and seeing how they relate around this topic. I was looking at the different styles of conversation that you can go about. And then that's what was making me reflect on my previous sets of conversations that I've had publicly. There's a bunch of people, starting with Plato, who did things in a dialectic fashion. And I don't know if you've come across this term, but I didn't know it well until recently. Dialectic rather than sort of a dialogue or debate. And particularly the Hegelian dialectic, all sounds very posh, doesn't it? He went about having a conversation that had 3 stages. He was putting forward a motion or a proposition, and then they were looking to generate the thesis around that. Then they would try to generate the antithesis or antithesis. But then crucially, why it's different to sort of a debate is you're not then looking for a winner or loser, but then you're really looking for a synthesis. You're truly believing that both of these belong. How do they belong? And how in this stance, in this conversation, in this moment, will you and I bring that together? And I feel like it puts you both on the same team. Now, the critique of that is that it leads to very centrist ideas, because you got over here and you're over here, and then you end up in the middle. But I think that that's okay on this kind of subject, because I agree, if you're looking at a binary epistemic type conversation, you're looking to sort of fact check and make a clear argument and then the right answer to win. But I don't think that this is as simple as that. And I think there's more to be gained in relationship, in understanding, in appreciating that whether you're at this end of the spectrum or that end of the spectrum, no one can negate that we are both rational and irrational. The behavioral economists all get that. But again, they don't have an appreciation for the peak of what it can help you achieve as a human. So I'm coming into land. I've been thinking that I would like to do a series of pieces of content, which could be anything from a Zoom call like this to like a short piece of content or a debate or in person on the street. I could hold some meetings if Corona allows it, etc. But like kind of one a month for the next 10 months where people get to vote at the end of each piece of content. I was thinking to ask two things on this survey, if you like. Well, firstly, your email address. If you vote multiple times, we can tie up your vote to the multiple different moments in the journey. Do you think that humans in their best moments are essentially rational or irrational? And then secondly, what do you think about that? Do you think that's good or do you think that's bad? Because you could think we are rational and that's not a very good thing, or you could say we are essentially irrational, but I like that. I guess I would say at the beginning of this process, I believe that in our best moments, we're irrational, and that I think that's a good thing. I would go on to say that there's risks and we do need the scaffolding and all of that stuff. But the idea being that it'd be quite nice to liberate voting from a binary yes, no, and permanent thing. It'd be interesting to go on a voting journey where you're encouraging people to really take on this content one bit at a time and really see how it tweaks their mindset as they go along. So this has all come from the Oxford debate, because obviously I thought a lot about debating and the nature of it. And they didn't take a vote on the way in. Actually, we won the debate 66 to 33, but what does that mean? I may have lost people from the side of the city is immoral or that you would sell out in the city. We don't know. So I think that really misses the opportunity. And I think there's something about the ongoing journey of participatory voting that's really interesting. And I think that could be an interesting data set. So that's what I'm thinking about. The one little marker again, I did 2 guest lectures at UCL University looking at intelligence as a super concept. So liberating it from the disciplines of machine learning or from psychology where it came from, and trying to then say what could be true in an interdisciplinary sense that all disciplines could agree on. Through that inquiry, I basically came to this very simple crack in the wall or opening that I feel needs to be explored, but I haven't had the ability to do so yet, but hopefully further down the track I will, which is to say that if you look in the dictionary for the word paint, you see paint as a noun and you see paint as a verb. And as a noun, if you ask the question, what is paint? It's a good question. You get a series of inquiry leads you down to the kind of biochemical inquiry of like, what is the nature of this substance? What is the chemical that compound make up? What is the color? You get an aesthetic inquiry, you get all that kind of stuff. But if you ask, what is painting, which is the verb, you get an entirely different discipline or inquiry into what does it mean effectively to apply that substance to an environment. How do I take that substance and put it in motion with a paintbrush and my hand well onto a canvas? Just an entirely different body of work and nature of the inquiry. And if you look at intelligence in the dictionary, we only have it as a noun. We don't have it as a verb. And that strikes me very profoundly at the end of all of my 18 months research on it as just completely unexplored territory for this most important part of what helps us survive and thrive. It does contribute to our peak moments, but I don't think it defines us in that sense, in that purest sense. But it's not because we're stronger or faster than other animals that we survived. It's because of our intelligence and our ability to tell stories and use tools and work together. So not having a field of inquiry that is looking at this intelligence in motion, because if you think about intelligence, it really is only a process of engagement between a system and its environment that generates some kind of, something at the end, but it's the process by which this engagement happens. So very peculiar that we don't have that. So through touching on to morality through the Oxford Union talk and having done a lot of work on intelligence a couple of 3 years ago for UCL, and now putting in a good effort on rationality, I'm actually feeling like I'm beginning to build the bare bones, the skeleton of kind of a full stack of philosophy, really, that then leads on to So then what about it in motion? So then what are the values? And then what do you do with political structure, which I've done some of that political structure work already as well. So it helps me see it in a different light, if you like. And then you've got education and health. And this is why I think I might actually get there over the next decade, is Carl Gombrich. He started a university, and it's the first university in London to get approved in 50 years.
Wow.
It's called the London Interdisciplinary School. And I'll probably be doing some stuff with the university. But more personally, Carl, who's been my intellectual guide really for the last, well, ever since I learned to think, really. He basically, after the debate, said to me, look, we should write a book at some point. He used to be a professional opera singer, did a master's in physics. So basically all the areas that I'm weak in, I think that he can really bolster it up and really sort of help map it and lead us there. Yeah, there's two things I guess I'm saying. One is, I think in the background, there's a bit of work that seems to be building that I think will take me a decade, but I probably do have some of the ingredients now to actually pull that off, and it's worth continuing to pursue. But more pertinently, the slice of the pie that I'm focusing on at the moment this year, let's say, is around this public dialectic on rationality and irrationality. So there we go. Any questions, any thoughts, any ideas on any level? I'm happy just to sit back and listen for a while, because it just felt good just to get it out and have a welcome receiver.
Yeah, no, absolutely. There's a lot that has been popping up in my mind, but I think the thing that's screaming on top of my mind right now is that from the get-go in your thinking, you spoke about a spectrum of, like, you know, people being here and there. But I think a spectrum requires a frame of reference, you know, because what is the center? What does it mean to come to the center? I like to think of it more as integrating. Like if you take, again, like you can completely shift your, you know, movement if you change your frame of reference. For example, if you have this point of view and this point of view, but then there's another person that comes in and they have like this point of view over here, like, is that still left and right? I think what is interesting to explore within the rationality versus irrationality debate, I think, is to look at within what frame of reference are you looking at that. Because I like your sandwich. It makes sense. I feel that it intuitively as well. I've been really on a journey to really fully trust and learn to listen to my intuition, because in a way it allows me to act a shit ton faster than if I would like be analyzing everything. You know, even in business, I've been taking like the last year or so and like look at, okay, what decisions have been intuitive and which ones haven't been intuitive, and then the outcome. And all of my good decisions are intuitive decisions, and all the shite ones are the ones that I've been overanalyzing. So do you see them as opposites, or how do they integrate? What kind of point of view can we take where they sit together nicely?
Good. I mean, it's a great question, and I'll say some things, but I'm not sure I've got my head outside of it yet. So this is why this is helpful. I also don't need to answer everything, because I want to let it rise slowly throughout the content and the months, and resist conclusion, if you will. I'm clear about my biases, if you like, and what I want, what it feels to be good, but also I'm open-minded as well as I go through this journey. So part of the Hegelian dialectic style is to try to encourage, I think, what you're talking about. It's not an either or, it's, you know, how do we get to a synthesis? And then ironically, if you create a synthesis, that can then become the thesis for the next round of discussion. I feel like just in my journey, my personal human experience of growing up and learning in the world, I was offered this sort of theology, this mythology, and very connected to the intuitive self, with praying and expecting, like in the tradition I grew up in, expecting God to move, expecting God to speak to you, expecting prayers to be answered, and maybe even to feel sensations and miracles. And so very much subverting that sort of system to kind of thinking it through stuff, very much. Then when I was in Givi, went very much into, let me understand how the world works. Let me speak to neuroscientists and behavioral economists and macroeconomists and stuff. So then I expanded my vocabulary and my frame of reference for the rationality. So the reason I find myself with this rationality, irrationality thing is because it feels like it's very prominent in the lexicon. It feels like it is the two paths that I found growing up. And when I went to the woods, I didn't actually try to synthesize them. I tried to let them all lie where they were. and just to be and to start from scratch and let my eyes observing the real world, let whatever is real there. It's the trust thing. It was a big trust exercise. And it is important to this conversation, actually. The exercise very audibly in my head was, Dave, what if you are actually quite good? You're not good all the time. You fuck up a lot. But what if overall you are actually good? And that is a really simple thing to say, but was very difficult for me to come to terms with. You know, you grow up with this sin concept as a defining feature. I grew up with that. And the grace and the redemption as the defining feature. Now, I think we all need grace and forgiveness, and we all miss the mark. But I don't think it's what defines us. If you're going to say one thing about a person or the person, you know, a human, what is the one thing you say about them? There's lots of things you can say. So I actually had to trust that and let something rise. As that's risen for a few years, I'm now beginning to try and plug it back into the structural kind of narrative in society in a way that I think doesn't violate the experience that I've had. So I don't think I've answered your question at all, but I'm just saying that's where it comes from, is that's what I was offered. I can distinctly see the two paths, and none of the offerings feel like they hit the mark for me. The reason I'm asking you for this conversation is because I experienced it with you in our last conversation, and I can see in the music that you make and how energized you are, and how you encourage and engage and creatively move me forwards. You're acting out of that place. You know, you have the potential for that kind of stuff, and you've probably lived some of these very beautiful irrational moments in your life, and will continue to do more. And I want to encourage that in you as well by discussing it and creating a home for that.
I love how you put it as beautiful irrationality in that sense, because in the end, it's true. You're in moments like that, like everything, the constructs that we build our entire lives upon kind of disappear. Time, structure, it's like the doing and the being merge. There's
effortless.
Yeah, it is effortless. Exactly. Have you read Ernest Becker's Denial of Death? Basically, his book, Denial of Death, is kind of a bringing together of all the big psychoanalytic work from Freud, Kierkegaard, Brown, and then tries to see if there's like a common theme or a red line through it. He speaks about character as a vital lie. He determines like 7 layers of what a character is. What he spoke about is like the character that we create. And so the character as a vital lie is, we need to set up those rules. And I think that's what that rationality is for you. We need to set up those rules to kind of interface with the world in a better way, and to make sure that, for example, you know, I don't have to get to know my mom every single time again that I see her, and like be like, okay, well, who's this person? What drives them? Like, what are they doing in my life? No, there's this character that she has created, and then I can reliably count on her feeding me, doing all those things for me. And that creates this rational subworld. But there is so much more out there. There's so much more above it that we can't comprehend, that we can't take in.
I get the concept, but my question is, how does it relate to rationality?
The rationality for me is trying to make sense of the experiences.
Yes. So it's both, and I'm interested in the ordering of how we see ourselves. So for me, it's not, are we one or are we the other? We're both, but what's more valuable, and how do we see what we're like in our best moments? And where it becomes crucial is because then you start asking questions of design. How do we design to get ourselves into our best selves as often as possible, both in our own personal lives and practices, but then also in society? And what I've realized as well is that you can't put forward a serious political, structural suggestion unless you've got a conception of what the human is and needs in their best and worst moments, let's say. Because then obviously what you're trying to do with society is trying to protect against and give opportunities for those behaviors to get reduced and maximized. Protection and flourishing, you know, beauty and justice for me. So they both belong. People have very varying different powers of rationality, and they have varying different powers of connection to their intuition. And you can see the consequences are quite significant in their lives both ways with that, and leads to all kinds of struggle and illness and stuff if those two things aren't in balance. But the combo and the synthesis leads us to something greater. So I guess I'm wanting to do a bit of a PR comms job on reselling irrationality to the world by creating this other part, this beautiful part, this aspirational part that I observe in you and I see in people that I admire.
There's so much to pull together, and I feel like we should be maybe even like making this more regular or whatever, to really dive into it and like let it digest a little bit. Because the thing that I've written down right here is like that I think it's more of this combination. Like you have like, the rationality of really, this is what we hold on to or whatever. And then you have like irrational rationality, and then you have like rational irrationality, and irrational irrationality. And I think it's really, I think what those things mean, or like, I think there might be an opportunity to go deeper in, because I'm not sure exactly what they mean.
Well, a question for another time to help me understand that, because I mean, it's similar to the model around the known and unknown and the 4 quadrants around that.
Yeah.
But I guess my question would be, what would be the difference between irrational rationality and rational rationality? Because I can't discern the difference at the moment. What you're proposing there, that can go into the unfolding over the months.
I like the fact that you kind of choose a framework like the dialectic one. It does take away the opportunity to frame the conversations completely differently.
It's definitely a constraint.
What you also could do from another perspective is just like take the first 10 minutes to just frame, okay, well, within what point of view are we looking at this? Maybe a solution can be to really just, really box in what rational is and what irrational is. The problem with that is that if you do that, there's a whole space in between that you just throw out. Because to me, they really are something that don't necessarily oppose each other, but they intertwine. And for me, it really is also a very dynamic concept. It's not static at all. And it evolves with that point of view.
When it comes down to actually holding a public discourse of any kind requires clear framing. It's too vague at this point to sort of feel like it has value, but it might just need a little bit more teasing out to get me to understand it so I could speak about it clearly. If I pose the question to you directly, what are humans like in their best moments?
I would definitely go for beautiful irrationality. Definitely.
I need to very clearly define what I mean by rationality for there to be a cohesive conversation, especially across multiple bits of content. There needs to be an agreement of at least what I'm talking about. Oh my gosh. I mean, I've got pages and pages of research on it. There is not a unified sense of agreement at all. So it is important for the purpose of the exercise to have some kind of like, connection across what we mean by that. Also, there's a bit that we should come back to another day, which is about the nature of productive work and what AI is doing to what work we're good for. And my view is that AI is eating out our work from the middle outwards. All of the most rational computation stuff, that STEM stuff that we've been teaching our kids, is that kind of how they're going to make money and be professionals. I actually think that machine intelligence is eating it out from the middle, and you would know better than I, because it's your business to know. But what I think we're left with is pure ideation, exponential kind of leaps of creativity,
paradigm shifting, yeah,
and smoothness. And smoothness for me is this final furlong, this final bit of touch, the last inch of the interaction, which that human touch, basically. So even on a production level, I think we're left with the two ends of the spectrum when you've got a full suite of machine intelligence doing a bunch of work. So actually, I think it's prudent to focus on the extremities of what it means to be human in order to train ourselves well to continue to be useful and have meaning and purpose. But I don't know if you see it similarly or a bit different with your work.
I see it more on a task level. So I have this model that I use for the anatomy of a task. And so, you have a task, there's an input, any input. Then there's a prediction that you make around that input. There's a judgment that you make around that prediction. And then there's an action that you take, and there's an outcome. And from that outcome, you learn again in order to use that feedback to really adjust your prediction and your judgment.
Put my thing in your language then. I'm talking about what it takes to generate a task, an interesting task, a new task, and then the final bit of the execution of that task. But it's that middle chunks, the judgment and the planning and the projections and stuff that I'm thinking they're going to eat up.
Absolutely. I agree. For me, I see that really as the paradigm shifting thinking. Like, an AI needs to be trained on a bunch of data, which is by definition within a certain paradigm. An AI is super good at going from 1 to 1,000. We humans, we go from 0 to 1. And that's where literally the infinity lies, it's like
Yes.
zero. What is it? Like, what is that? And that's where irrationality comes in as well for me, because those ideas, where do they come from? Like, what do you, like, what is, it's
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. That's what makes it so beautiful to be human, I think.
So with all of that said, with all of the integral synthesizing intentions behind this and trying to get a bit clearer with the framing of the terrain, let's say this piece of content goes out, let's say, and people get to vote. Do they think at the end of listening to this piece of content, based on their existing experience plus this piece of content, do they now think that humans are primarily rational or irrational? And do they think that that's a good or a bad thing? Do you think that's interesting data? Like, do you think that they're the best questions we could be asking that are low barrier to entry and high scalability in terms of both longitudinally for that person over 10 pieces of content time, but also looking across differences?
My brain's going nuts. It's like, I do think they are interesting questions. Maybe the question should be, can we create an environment where being irrational is encouraged and not seen as dangerous anymore? You're saying about like doing this PR stunt. What about just completely shifting the paradigm? And that's what I'm trying to do, I think, as well with the AI farms, and kind of creating what I call this operating system with a bunch of basic functions, like, for example, the food and all that.
I like that question. That is a good question. What I went through with this debate was realizing that to scale something and to make it easy for people to comprehend, it's got to be super simple and reductive, really.
I mean, maybe I'm already thinking too far, and maybe the new paradigm can be emergent from the discussions that you enable.
Within a week, I will decide what question and what tool, and run 10 pieces of content. Obviously, if the conversation kind of explodes, maybe we'll do those 10 pieces of content in a month. Probably not. Probably more likely one a month for 10 months. But then once that first set of conversations around a certain thing is done, then we can re-engineer the framing, the container, to be maybe more evolved. One thing that has come up just for me quickly here about the question, one is what is reality, and two, how do you feel about it? If you were to say to me, hey, look, I think people are ultimately irrational, like as a higher, more important thing to say about them than to say that they're rational, but I don't think it's a good thing. If by the end of the conversation or the pieces of content you believed it was a good thing, I think I've done you a massive favor because I've helped you integrate your own understanding of what it means for you to be a human to something that you're actually pleased and proud of. And for me, that is of high value to unlock for people. I feel like my starting point is this union debate style. And I'm thinking to take a leap to move it towards a dialectic with the goal of moving from what looks like competition to synthesis. For me, that feels like I'm already taking a creative step away from the standard way of having discourse around this. So I think maybe you are just a step ahead in terms of like, of course, that's the way we are. Of course, that's what we're doing, because that's probably what you spend a lot of your time doing. But I'm trying to bring people with. Yeah. All right, mate. Well, we've gone way over, so I apologize about that. I really appreciate it.
This is super useful. I think like that as well. Like thinking through talking, where you're like, okay, well, and then you get that input, and then you kind of navigate that stuff. It's super useful to have that. And so I'm super glad to be able to do that for you, and I'll for sure be doing that with you. I told you, right? Like I'm still working on the impact coin there and going further there, the AI farms, and I'm sure there's plenty of other ideas that are going to come out of this podcast.
I think in whatever format we shall keep these conversations going. Chatting with you every month or two feels like it brings me a lot of life. As long as it's doing the same for you, then we're on to a good thing.
Absolutely, man. Absolutely.
All right, Guys.
See ya. Bye.